My name is Grace Mitchell. I am 31 years old. I am a pharmacist, a CVS clinic in Nashville, where I have been working for 5 years. I count things for a living. I measure things. I calculate interactions, the way one substance in the presence of another substance produces an effect that neither alone, and the way that effect can be beneficial or harmful depending entirely on dosage and context. I have been precise my whole professional life. I was not, for most of my personal life, equally precise about the things happening right in front of me. I was generous instead of precise. I gave the benefit of the doubt instead of doing the calculation. I counted to one incident rather than adding them up. I am going to tell you what it looked like when I finally started doing the math. My sister Brittany is 35 years old. She is my only sibling and my maid of honor, and the person I have loved the most complicated way for my entire life. Complicated is the right word. Not dysfunctional, not broken, but complicated in the specific way of a relationship where love is real and genuine and also coexists with a pattern that, once you see it, is difficult to unsee. The pattern is this: Brittany has a gift for making other people's significant moments about herself. And I want to be clear about this, because the story I am going to tell you is not the story of a villain. It is the story of a pattern, and a pattern is not the same as a villain. The pattern is: Grace has a milestone. Brittany is present for the milestone. By the end of the milestone, Brittany's needs have become the center of the event. I noticed this for the first time at my Bachelorette weekend in Savannah, Georgia, in April of this year. I noticed it the way you notice something has been true for a long time when you finally look directly at it. Not as a surprise, but as a confirmation. The thing you have been sensing without naming, finally visible in full. I want to tell you about the weekend in Savannah, and I want to tell you about what I did 6 months later, when I sat down at my kitchen table and counted backward through every milestone of my adult life and understood that the weekend in Savannah was the most recent episode of something that had been running for a decade. It wasn't one weekend. I just finally counted how many times. And the count, the specific, dated, named account of every milestone that Brittany made about herself, is what I brought to a conversation that changed the relationship permanently. Not ended it, changed it, in the specific way that things change when you finally say out loud what has been true all along. Brittany and I grew up in a brick colonial in Brentwood, Tennessee, the daughters of Thomas and Carol Mitchell. My father, a corporate attorney. My mother was a high school English teacher for 27 years before she retired 2 years ago. We were raised in a household that was warm and organized, and had strong opinions about books and punctuality and the appropriate level of drama that was acceptable in any given situation, which was low. We are 4 years apart. Brittany was born first, which she has always considered a form of seniority that extends beyond the literal. She is the older sister in the specific sense of someone who arrived first and has never entirely let go of the advantage that confers. This is not unusual among firstborns, and it does not make her a bad person. It makes her a person with a particular relationship to hierarchy and precedence that manifests, in our family, as an expectation that her needs and experiences are slightly more significant than other people's. Brittany was, growing up, the kind of older sister who was simultaneously your closest companion and your biggest source of social anxiety. She was funny, genuinely funny, the kind of funny that comes from observational intelligence rather than performance. She was protective in the way of older sisters, who have decided that their younger sibling is their responsibility. She defended me twice in middle school situations where defense was warranted, and once in high school where it was not strictly necessary but appreciated. She taught me how to drive, not legally, in our neighborhood on a Sunday afternoon when our parents were out, and she was patient and only briefly terrified. We were close. We are close. The pattern I am going to describe does not negate the closeness. It coexists with the closeness, which is part of what made it hard to see for so long. If Brittany and I had a bad relationship, the pattern would have been legible much earlier. It was the goodness of the relationship, the genuine affection, the real history, the deep familiarity, that made the pattern invisible for the years I was inside it. She majored in communications at Belmont University in Nashville and has worked in marketing since graduating. She is currently a senior marketing manager at a healthcare company in downtown Nashville, a role she is good at and that suits the specific quality of her intelligence, which is broad, interpersonal, rather than deep and analytical. She has an apartment in East Nashville that she has decorated with the care of someone who understands that spaces communicate things about the people inside them. She has a wide social circle and is the kind of person who is described, consistently, as a great friend, the person who shows up when someone is in crisis, who remembers birthdays, who sends the right thing at the right moment. It's true, she is that person. And she is also, simultaneously, the person whose grief expands to fill the room it is in, whose difficulty with her own emotions means that when she is struggling, the struggle becomes the dominant weather of any space she is in, whose presence in moments when she is not okay makes being in the room with her an exercise in managing her rather than sharing the space. She was not okay in April. Boyfriend of 2 years, a man named Derek, ended their relationship 3 weeks before my Bachelorette weekend. The ending was not brutal. They had not been right for each other for some time, and Derek had been honest about it. But it was painful, because and Brittany was in the specific at the great grief of a recent breakup, raw, consuming, close to the surface. I knew this. I knew when I booked the Bachelorette weekend that she was in this place. I made a decision that I now understand was based on a story I had been telling myself. That my milestone would be big enough, and my need present enough, that Brittany would find a way to hold her grief alongside it for 48 hours. That was a story. The reality was different. I want to tell you about Brittany in the honest and specific way that the who love us deserved to be described. Not as caricatures of their worst qualities, and not as edited versions of their best ones. Brittany Mitchell is 35 years old. She has the specific quality of people whose emotional experience is large and close to the surface. She feels things in full, which means that her joy is genuine and visible, and her grief is genuine and visible, and her enthusiasm is real, and her distress is real, and the volume on all of it is average. This is not performance, or at least, it is not only performance. There is a person inside the large feelings who genuinely experiences them at full volume. The performance layer comes when the feelings expand to fill space that is not theirs to fill. I have watched this quality of hers for 31 years. It has manifested in different ways, depending on the situation. In moments of genuine crisis, when my mother was in the hospital 2 years ago, when a close friend of hers lost a child. Brittany has been in exactly who you would want, present, her large feelings directed entirely at the person who needed them. She is capable of great warmth and great focus. The problem is not her capacity to be present. The problem is the specific phenomenon that occurs when Brittany is the one who is struggling. When Brittany is struggling, the struggling becomes ambient. It is not that she announces it, and then everyone agrees to feel it with her. It is more subtle than that. She does not take over rooms dramatically. She asks questions that redirect toward her situation. She introduces her difficulty into conversations in ways that feel like sharing rather than centering, until you realize at the end of the conversation that the conversation has been entirely about her. Do not think she knows how good she is at it. The Derek situation was a legitimate source of pain. They had been together for 2 years. She had believed, for some portion of the time, that he was the one. The ending was clean and honest, and still hurt in all the ways that 2 years of investment hurt. When the investment doesn't become what you hoped it would. I was sympathetic. I was fully, genuinely sympathetic. The but is important, and I want to give it the space it deserves. The Bachelorette weekend was something I had been planning for 3 months. Not because I am a person who overinvests in Bachelorette weekends. I am not a person who overinvests in Bachelorette weekends. I am a pharmacist who went to pharmacy school and has a mortgage and her hair done every 8 weeks when she remembers. But this was my one big pre-wedding celebration, and I had planned it with care. A hotel in downtown Savannah, reservations at a restaurant I had been wanting to go to for years, a ghost tour on Friday night, because I am the person who enjoys a ghost tour, a spa morning on Saturday. A weekend for 6 women who mattered to me. A weekend. I had asked Brittany to be my maid of honor at Christmas 4 months before the wedding. She had cried and said yes. She had been enthusiastic and present, and had helped with planning, and had said multiple times that she could not wait for the Bachelorette weekend. I believed her. 3 weeks before the weekend, Derek ended things. I called Brittany immediately. I spent 2 hours on the phone with her that evening. I called again the next day. I was her sister, and she was hurting, and supporting her was not a burden. It was what I wanted to do. What I did not account for, what I had not yet named clearly enough to account for, was that Brittany's grief had a specific gravitational pull that did not defer to context. I had supported her through the breakup for 3 weeks. I had believed, when I put her name on the Savannah itinerary, that my wedding weekend would be strong enough to pull the gravity in a different direction. I was wrong. And in being wrong, I learned something about my sister that I had always known and never said. Before I take you to Savannah, I want to view the history. Not because the history is necessary. Understand that the Bachelorette was wrong. It was wrong on its own, as a standalone event. But because the history is what I understood in the 6 months after the wedding, when I sat at my kitchen table and did the count. And the count is what made the conversation with Brittany necessary and real. The history begins with my college graduation. I graduated from the University of Tennessee in May, with a degree in pharmaceutical sciences, with honors, having spent 4 years working harder than I had ever worked in my life. My parents drove up from Nashville. My grandmother came from Memphis. Karen, my best friend, drove from Nashville. It was a good day. Brittany drove up from Nashville, where she was working her first real job at the time. She arrived with a migraine. Not a performed migraine. She gets them. They are real. I am not disputing the migraine. But the migraine required significant management during the graduation itself and the dinner afterward, and by the time the day was over, a meaningful portion of it had been spent managing Brittany's migraine rather than celebrating my graduation. My mother and I drove Brittany home. I did not get to go to the dinner I had wanted to with my friends, because Brittany needed to leave. At the time, she has migraines. It was unavoidable, she came, and that was what mattered. The history continues with my pharmacy school match day. If you are not in medical or pharmacy school, match day is the day you find out where you have been accepted. It is a significant professional milestone, the day you know where your career is beginning. My match day was in March, 2 years after undergrad. My parents called. Karen called. My professors called with congratulations. I called Brittany. She said congratulations. Then she said, "Oh my God, I have to tell you something. Michael did this thing at work today and I am losing my mind." And she told me for 45 minutes about a conflict with her colleague Michael. At the time, she was having a hard week, she needed to talk, my news would be there to celebrate later. The history continues with my first apartment. I moved into my first apartment by myself. Not a shared situation, my own place. The first time in my adult life that the space I lived in was entirely mine. I had a housewarming gathering that was small and lovely. Karen, 2 friends from pharmacy school, Brittany. Brittany arrived and told me, within the first 20 minutes, about the fight she had her then boyfriend on the way over. The conversation about the apartment, what I liked about it, what I was planning to do with it, what it meant to me, and then disappeared into a 2-hour conversation about the fight. At the time, she said it was recent, it would have been cruel not to hear her out. The history continues with my first job. My first pharmacist position at a clinic in Nashville, the culmination of 8 years of work. I called Brittany to tell her. She said, "Oh Grace, that is so exciting. I'm so proud of you. Can I tell you what happened with Derek?" She then told me about the most recent development in the Derek relationship, which was at that point about 3 months old. At the time, she asked permission, she acknowledged my news, she was going through something. These are the 4 milestones from before the Bachelorette weekend that I identified, when I did the count, as instances of the pattern, not the full list. There were smaller moments that I not to include because smaller moments have more ambiguity, and I was not trying to build a case, I was trying to see clearly. The 4 I named were the clearest examples of a recurring dynamic. Grace has something significant. Brittany is present. By the end of the event, Brittany's situation is the subject. And then the Bachelorette weekend, which was not a smaller moment. Which was, in its potential and in what it became, the clearest example of the pattern at its most visible and its most costly. I took 6 women to Savannah for 48 hours to celebrate my wedding. And I spent a significant portion of those 48 hours sitting in a hotel room on the bed, listening to my sister cry about Derek. Savannah in April is extraordinary. If you have not been, I want you to understand what I am telling you when I say we were in Savannah. The Spanish moss and the squares and the row houses and the smell of the azaleas and the particular quality of the light in the late afternoon that makes the whole city look like something from a different century. I had been once before on a road trip with Karen in my mid-20s, and I had wanted to go back ever since. My Bachelorette weekend was the occasion. We drove down from Nashville on a Friday morning, 6 of us in 2 cars. Me and Karen, and 2 friends from pharmacy school, and 2 friends from our neighborhood in Nashville, who I had known since we were kids. Brittany drove with Karen and me, which I had arranged because Karen had insisted, and because Karen's presence is a reliable stabilizing force in situations that have the potential to go sideways. Karen Alvarez has been my best friend for 14 years. She is 32. She is an event planner in Nashville. She is funny and practical, and has a specific gift for reading rooms accurately and making small, precise adjustments that change the energy of a situation without anyone noticing she has done anything. She had been listening to me talk about Brittany for 14 years. She knew the pattern better than I did, because she had been watching it from the outside while I was inside it, making excuse. The drive down. Brittany was subdued but present. She talked about the weekend plans, with the appropriate enthusiasm of someone who was trying. I noticed the trying and was grateful for it. We arrived at the hotel at 2 p.m. The hotel was beautiful, a boutique property in the historic district, the kind of Savannah hotel that has high ceilings and original floors and a rooftop bar where you can see the squares and the river simultaneously. We checked in, dropped bags, assembled in the lobby. Everyone was excited. I was excited. It was a beautiful afternoon in Savannah, and I was getting married in 6 weeks, and these were my people, and the weekend was beginning. We went to the rooftop bar for the first hour. Drinks, the view, the warmth of the group. 6 women who liked each other and were there for a specific person and were happy to be there. I had a gin and tonic and looked out at the city and felt, for approximately 50 minutes, exactly as I had hoped to feel. At the 50-minute mark, Brittany's phone rang. She looked at it and made a face that I recognized. She said, "I'm so sorry, I have to take this." She went inside for 23 minutes. I know because I checked my phone when she went in and when she came back. When she came back, her eyes were red. She sat down beside me and said, "I'm so sorry. That was my friend Jenny calling about the Derek thing. I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have taken it." I said it was okay. I meant it at that point. It was one call. The ghost tour was at 7 p.m. We ate at a casual place before, nothing fancy for Friday night, saving the good reservation for Saturday. Brittany was present through dinner. She laughed at the right things. She was trying, and I could see the trying, and I was grateful for it, and I told myself the rest of the weekend was going to be fine. The ghost tour. If you enjoy ghost tours, the Savannah Ghost Tour is an excellent ghost tour. It is one of the better ghost tours in the country, and I say this as someone has been on 3 ghost tours and considers herself a modest connoisseur of the format. I was enjoying it. I was walking through the squares of Savannah at 9 p.m. with 5 of my favorite people on the Friday before my wedding. This was, by any reasonable measure, a good moment. Brittany walked beside me for most of the tour. She talked, in the gaps between the guide's narration, about Derek. Not constantly, not in a way that was theatrically obvious. In the sideways, threading way she had of introducing her situation. A comment that seemed adjacent and then pulled the conversation toward her. A question about something we had seen that ended with a reflection on her relationship. I answered. I redirected. I was present for both the tour and for her. We got back to the hotel at 10:30. The group went to the rooftop bar for a late drink. Brittany said she was tired and was going to go to bed. I said okay. She hugged me and said, "I love you. This is so beautiful. I'm sorry I've been in my head. Tomorrow is going to be amazing." I believed her. I went up to the rooftop bar. I had one more drink with Karen and the others. It was a beautiful night and I was happy. At midnight I went to my room. Brittany and I were sharing, which had seemed like a good idea when I booked the room and which now presented the specific logistical reality of 2 sisters in one room at midnight, one of whom was asleep and one of whom was awake and processing a complicated emotional state. She was not asleep. She was lying in the dark. When I came in, she said, "Can we talk for a minute?" We talked for 2 hours and 40 minutes. I know because my phone was on the nightstand, and I looked at it when we started, and I looked at it when we finished. At 2:47 a.m., 4 hours before the wedding morning alarm. 2 hours and 40 minutes, in the dark, in a hotel room in Savannah. The night before the day I was getting married, my sister cried about Derek. I held space. I listened. I asked the questions that said, I am here, I hear you, your pain is real. At 2:47 a.m., when she finally fell asleep, I lay in the dark, and I felt something that I did not name until much later. Not anger. Something more tired than anger. Saturday was the spa morning. I had booked treatments for all 6 of us, 90 minutes of the specific, managed piece of a good spa morning. We arrived at 10. The spa was quiet and warm and smelled like eucalyptus, and the promise of an hour and a half of not being responsible for anything. Brittany lasted 40 minutes. At 40 minutes, she came out of her treatment early. She said it hadn't felt right, that she felt more anxious than relaxed. She sat in the waiting area. When I finished my treatment and came out, she was sitting with her phone and her eyes were puffy. I sat with her for a few minutes. She said Derek had posted something on Instagram. A photo. Just a photo of somewhere he had been. She had seen it, and it had undone the 40 minutes of massage. I said the things that are true, and that are also, in that context, completely unhelpful. It is going to get easier. Time will help. You don't have to look at his Instagram. She nodded and said she knew and she was sorry. The spa morning ended with me sitting in the waiting room of a Savannah spa with my sister who was crying quietly over an Instagram photo, while my 4 friends finished their treatments and came out and read the room, and were gracious about it, because they were good people and they loved me. They managed the delicateness of the situation with care. The restaurant was at 8 p.m. This was the reservation I had been most looking forward to. A farm-to-table place in the historic district that had been open for 3 years, and that had received the kind of press makes you make a reservation 4 months in advance. I had been thinking about this dinner since March. Dinner was good. The food was as good as I had hoped. The conversation was warm. Brittany was present in a way that felt genuine. She had clearly made an effort, and the effort was visible, and I received it as such. At approximately 9:15, over dessert, Brittany began to tell the table, all 5 of us, about Derek, not in a raw, grieving way. In the social storytelling way that people sometimes use their difficulties as conversational material. She was funny about it. She is genuinely funny. The table laughed. Derek's texts, which she read aloud, were legitimately absurd, and we laughed at the absurdity in the way you laugh at things that are legitimately absurd. And then 15 minutes became 30 minutes, became 45 minutes, and the dessert plates had been cleared. And we were in the last hour of my Bachelorette dinner, in the restaurant I had made reservation for in March, and the conversation had been about Derek for 45 of the final 60 minutes. My friend Madison, one of the pharmacy school friends, caught my eye across the table at some point in those 45 minutes and gave me a look that was both sympathetic and helpless. I gave her the small nod of someone who has made peace with the situation and is not create drama at their own Bachelorette dinner over it. I did not say anything. I sat at the table I had reserved in March in Savannah, the night before my wedding, and I listened to my sister tell a funny story about her breakup, and I laughed at the funny parts, and I paid for dinner, and we went back to the hotel. Karen walked with me the last block back to the hotel, slightly behind the others. "Are you okay?" I said I was fine. She said no. She did not say anything else. She had been watching it all weekend, and she had said nothing, because it was my weekend, and my sister and the choices about how to handle it were mine. But she walked that last block beside me and let me know, without words, that she had seen it. That mattered. It was the only thing, that weekend, that made me feel fully seen. The wedding was on a Saturday in May, 6 weeks after the Bachelorette weekend. The venue was a barn venue outside Nashville, the kind of Tennessee venue that is genuinely beautiful in a way that photographs extraordinarily well, but that also feels real when you are inside it, which I cared about more than the photographs. My husband-to-be, David, was the right person and the day was going to be a good one. Getting ready was supposed to begin at 9 a.m. The hair and makeup artist arrived at 9. My 4 bridesmaids arrived at 9. Karen arrived at 9, with coffee for everyone and the specific competence of an event planner who had been planning this morning in her head for months. Brittany arrived at 11:15. She texted at 10:30 to say she was running behind. She texted at 11 to say she was 10 minutes away. She arrived at 11:15, which was 2 hours and 15 minutes after everyone else and 45 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. She came in apologizing. She had overslept. Really overslept, she said, not the usual slightly oversleeping. She had been up late the night before, she said, because she had having a hard time. She was sorry. She was genuinely. She could see by the room that she was late in a way that had caused stress, and she was sorry for causing stress on my wedding morning. I said, "It's okay. We need to get you ready." We got her ready. The hair and makeup artist, who was a professional of the first order, and who had clearly navigated delayed wedding members before, managed the compression of the schedule with the efficiency of someone who had budgeted for this eventuality. Brittany was ready with 12 minutes to spare. What I felt on my wedding morning, my actual feeling, underneath the management of the situation and the getting Brittany ready and the 12 minutes to spare, was a specific and contained exhaustion. Not at Brittany specifically, in that moment, at the accumulated weight of a weekend in Savannah, and a wedding morning, and the particular drain of being the person who holds things together in situations where someone else is not holding their part. I had Karen. Karen was beside me for the 12 minutes before the ceremony, and she held my hand for a moment and said, "Beautiful. This is your day." She said it with the specific weight of someone who meant it to counteract something. I went and got married. David was at the end of the aisle with an expression I will spend of my life being glad I walked toward. The ceremony was beautiful. The vows were everything I had wanted. The photographs are by any measure exactly right. And then there was the toast. Brittany's maid of honor toast at the reception, which I had been anticipating, with a complicated mixture of hope and the low-grade anxiety of someone who has spent the previous 6 weeks watching her maid of honor struggle and wondering whether the struggle would find its way into the toast. It found its way into the toast. Brittany gave the maid of honor toast at the reception. I want to give it to you as accurately as I can, because the accuracy matters and because 6 months later, when I was doing the count, the toast was one of the data points I returned to most often. She started with me. She talked about our childhood, specific memories, the kind that sisters share because they belong to both of you. She was funny and warm and the room was with her. She described me in terms that were accurate and loving. My precision, my care for other people, my tendency to make a plan and stick to it. She said David was right for me in the specific way she could see from the outside. She said she was happy for us. This was approximately 2 minutes of the toast. I have to be honest with you all about something. The last few months have been hard for me personally. And watching Grace find this, watching her find David and find this love, find this day, it has made me think a lot about what I want and what I'm looking for and what love can look like when it's right. She continued in this direction for approximately 4 minutes. She talked about Derek without naming him, a relationship that recently ended. She talked about what she had learned about herself. She talked of the difference between what she had settled for and what she hoped to find. She talked about watching Grace get married and feeling hope for her own future. It was not terrible. I want to be precise about this because the toast, catastrophically bad. It was warm and it was real, and some of it was genuinely moving. The room was with her for most of it, but the ratio was approximately 2 minutes about me and David, approximately 4 minutes about Brittany and what she was going through and what she hoped for. The maid of honor toast at my wedding was approximately 30% about me and 70% about my sister's emotional journey in the context of my wedding. I smiled through the toast. I raised my glass. The room raised their glasses. David held my hand under the table. The reception continued. Karen was beside me for a moment after the toast. She said nothing. She just squeezed my arm once and then went back to her seat. I have been with David for 3 years total. He is steady and smart and knows me with the specific clarity of someone who has paid attention. He said later that night, after everyone had gone and it was just the two of us in the honeymoon suite. Head complicated. He said, I know. He did not me explain it. He just held me. That was the right call. I carried the complicated feeling for 6 months. Not actively, not in a way that disrupted my daily life. I was married to David and I was happy in the marriage and I was back at work and my life was full and good. But the complicated feeling was there, in the background, in the way of things I had not yet fully looked at. And 6 months after the wedding, on a Tuesday evening in November, when David was working late and I was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of wine and my planner open, I picked up pen and I started writing. The list started as a single line. I wrote, Bachelorette weekend, Savannah, April. And then I thought, was that one of many or was that the exception? And I started writing backward. I want to tell you about the counting, because the counting is the heart of what happened 6 months after the wedding. And what the counting produced is what made the conversation with Brittany possible. I went backward through the milestones of my adult life. Not every event, not every birthday or holiday or ordinary occasion. The milestones, the significant, specifically delineated events that been mine in the way that certain events are yours. And I asked for each one, was Brittany present? And if she was, did it stay mine? College graduation, 2015. The migraine. Did it stay? No. Match day, pharmacy school. Yes, phone call. Did it stay mine? First apartment, 2000. Yes. The fight with the boyfriend, did it stay mine? Partially about me, partially about the fight. First job, 2019. Yes, phone call. Did it stay mine? Briefly, then no. Engagement, 22. It's one I sat with for a while. My engagement had been a genuinely joyful day. David had proposed in a way that was exactly right for us, and I had called everyone I loved to share it. I had called Brittany, who had been happy and warm, and had asked all the right questions about the proposal. She had also, within 45 minutes of the call, mentioned that things with Derek, the relationship that would end 2 years later, were complicated, and she was not sure where it was going. That conversation had lasted another hour. Did the engagement stay mine? The day did. The call mostly did not. Bachelorette weekend, 223. Did it stay mine? Did it stay mine? Wedding morning. Yes. Did it stay mine? Mostly. Wedding toast. Yes. Did it stay mine? Percent. Milestones. Of the 7, the event itself had belonged to me in 6 of them. The emotional space around the event, the conversations, the texture of the experience, the way I felt during and after, had been significantly occupied by Brittany's situation in 5 of them. I put the pen down. I looked at the list. I sat with it for a while. Then I called Karen. Karen answered on the second ring. I just made a list of my milestones for the past 8 years and how many of them Brittany made about herself. Karen was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How many?" I told her. She said my name with the weight 14 years of watching something and not saying anything, because it was not her place to say it, and it was not her sister. She said, "I have been waiting for you to make that list." She said, "I have known since your pharmacy school graduation." I said, "Why didn't you say anything?" She said, "Because you needed to see it yourself. And because you love her, and naming it for you before you were ready would felt like an attack on your sister rather than information. I was waiting for you to be ready." I was ready. The list had made me ready because seeing it written out, the dates, the events, proportion, had removed the ambiguity that generous interpretation had been sustaining for 8 years. It was not one weekend. It was not 5 disconnected instas. It was a pattern. And a pattern has a cause. And the cause, in this case, was something in Brittany that needed to be named, to her, by me, in the specific direct way that I had spent 8 years not being direct enough to name it. I thought about how to have the conversation for 2 weeks before I had it. Not strategizing, exactly. I am not scripts things. Thinking about what I needed the conversation to accomplish, and what I need it not to accomplish. What I needed it to accomplish, for Brittany and, specifically, what the pattern had been. Not a general you make things about yourself. I was not interested in a general accusation because a general accusation invites a general defense. I needed the specific instances dated and named so that the conversation about facts rather than impressions. What I needed it not to accomplish, destruction. I was not trying to end my relationship with my sister. I was not trying to punish her. I did not want the conversation to produce crying and defensiveness, and a 3-hour emotional processing session, ironically, be another instance of the pattern, another occasion on which Brittany's emotional response would become the dominant subject of an event that was supposed to be about grace. I needed the conversation to be short, specific, and clear. And I needed to give it to Brittany in a way that did not invite an immediate emotional response, because I was not prepared to hold the immediate emotional response. I decided to send a letter first. Not a cold letter, a warm one, the kind that begins with love and ends with love, and has the hard part in the middle. I wrote it on a Saturday morning while David was out running. It took 4 drafts. The final version was 1 page. It said, "I love you. I want to talk to you about something that I have been thinking about for a long time, and I want you to sit with it before we talk, because I want the conversation to be real, rather than reactive." It said, "I have noticed a pattern over the past 8 years." It named the pattern without accusation. Not you always make things about yourself, but these specific events. Here it happened. It named each of the 7 milestones. Brief, factually, without editorial. It said, "I am not angry. I am not trying to make you feel bad. I am telling you this because I love you, and because I want a different relationship going forward." It said, "I want to talk when you are ready." I mailed it. Fizzle mail. I made this choice deliberately. Email can be responded to impulsively. A text almost certainly will be. A physical letter requires sitting with it before responding. It takes a day to arrive. It takes another day to decide how to respond. The delay was the point. She called me 4 days after I mailed it. She said, "I got your letter." Her voice was very quiet. Not the volume turned up quality of Brittany in distress, but something smaller and more careful. She said, "Can we talk?" I said, "Let me come to you." I drove to her apartment in East Nashville on a Saturday afternoon. She had cleaned. She had made coffee. These small preparations told me something about the state she was in. She was not defensive, not in reactive mode. She was trying to be ready. I sat across from her at her kitchen table, two sisters, in a decorated apartment in East Nashville, on a Saturday afternoon, and I opened the folder I had brought with me. I put the list on the table between us, not dramatically, not placed like an accusation, like a prosecutor's exhibit, placed like information. Here is what I have been looking at. I said, I want to walk through these with you, not to make you bad. So that's the same information. She said, okay. I walked through each of the 7 milestones. I said what had happened, briefly and without editorializing. I said the graduation and the migraine. I said match day and the 45 minutes about Michael. I said the apartment and the fight. I said the first job call and the Derek situation. I said the engagement call. I said the Bachelorette weekend. I said the wedding morning. I said the toast. I said each one in 2 or 3 sentences. I did not add, and it made me feel this way. I did not add, and that was wrong. I added nothing. I just said what had happened. When I finished, Brittany was looking at the table. She said, I know. Just that. She said, I know I do this. I have always known I do this. It doesn't feel like a choice when it's happening. It feels like I'm sharing. It feels like I'm being real with you. And I can see that it's not that. What is it? I think I get scared when things are happening for you. Not jealous. I don't think it's jealousy. More like, my feelings get loud and I don't know how to make them quiet, and so they come out. And the person I feel safest having with is you. I said, I know that. And I want to be the person you feel safest with. But there are moments when what I need is to be the one who is held, not the one who is holding. And those moments are exactly moments I've named. She cried. Real tears, not performance, not volume turned up. The small, specific crying of someone who's recognized something true about themselves and is not comfortable with what they are recognizing. I did not move toward her. I stayed in my chair and I gave her a moment, and then I said, I'm not ending anything with you. I love you. But I am going to stop telling you about things before they happen. Because I have learned that sharing them in advance means spending the event managing you through the anticipation. From now on, I will tell you after, she said. That is completely fair. She said without argument, without negotiation, without the emotional response escalating into the conversation becoming about her. It was the clearest moment of the entire afternoon. The moment I understood that the pattern was not who she was, but something she was doing, and that she was capable of recognizing the difference when it was named clearly enough. Before I left her apartment that Saturday, Brittany said one more thing. She had been quiet for a while, and I had been about to stand up and put on my jacket when she said, Can I ask you something? I said yes. She said, Is there a version of this where I can do better? Or is this a thing I've done so long that you've already decided how it's going to go? I sat back down. There is absolutely a version where you do better. I would not have had this conversation with you if I did not believe that. She said, How will I know if I'm doing better? I said, Specifically. The way I just told you specifically what the pattern was. She nodded. She said, I want to try. I believed her. Not in the naive way I had believed things about Brittany for 31 years. The way that required me to give the benefit of the doubt so consistently that the doubt never got evaluated. I believed her in the way you believe someone when you have told them the truth, and they have received it, without defense. Trying is different from succeeding. I know this. I am watching to see what the trying looks like in practice. The first test was my promotion at the pharmacy 3 weeks after that Saturday, which I told her about after it happened rather than before. Called and said, "Tell me everything about it." And she listened for 40 minutes, and she made it about me. I am 31 years old. I am a pharmacist. I count things and I measure things and I night actions. I have been doing this professionally 5 years, and I have been doing this personally with the relationships in my life for approximately 6 months. What I have learned from counting is that patterns are visible once you look for them, and that looking for them is a choice. I chose for 8 years not to look. Not because I was stupid or weak or entirely lacking in self-awareness. I am none of those things. I chose not to look because the looking would have required naming something about my sister that I loved and did not want to evaluate critically. The love was real. The love made the evaluation harder. What I understand now is that evaluating clearly is not the opposite of loving. It is a different form of it. Naming the pattern to Brittany was not an act of aggression, it was an act of respect. It said, "I believe you are capable of understanding this and doing something different. I believe the relationship is worth the conversation. The relationship is worth the conversation. I still believe that. Brittany and I talk twice a week. She is trying, in the specific and observable way that trying looks like in practice. She asks questions and stays with the answers and does not thread her own situation into the conversation uninvited. She is not perfect at this. She is better than she was. Better is enough to keep going. Karen was right that I had needed to make the list myself. And she was right that I had not been ready until I was. Some things require you to arrive at them on your own schedule, and the help that is useful is not the help that forces the arrival, but the help that is present when you get there. Karen has been present for 14 years. She is still present. I am grateful for her in the specific, named way of someone who understands what it means to have a friend who watches clearly and waits patiently and says, "I was waiting for you to make that list." David asked me recently if I felt like the conversation had done what I needed to do. He said, "What does the rest look like?" I said, "The rest is what happens over the next several years, whether she keeps trying, whether the pattern stays broken, whether I can share milestones with my sister the way sisters are supposed to share milestones." I told her at a work award last month, in advance, before it happened. A test of the new arrangement. She called when she heard. She said, "Tell me about it." She listened. She celebrated. She made it about me. It wasn't one weekend. I just finally counted how many times. And I stopped counting at the right moment, when the count had done its work. That's what I keep. The clarity that the count gave me. And the sister on the other end of it, trying. If you stayed until the end, thank you. This one is different from some of the stories in this series, because the person doing the harm is not a villain and the harm is not dramatic. It is quiet. It is accumulated. It is the kind of thing that happens in families when someone has a way of being that makes room for themselves at the expense of the people around them. And when the people around them love them enough to make that room for a long time before they name what the room has cost. I want to say one thing directly. Naming a pattern in someone you love is not an act of aggression. It is an act of respect for yourself and for them. It says, "I think the relationship is worth the honest conversation." It says, "I believe you are capable of something different if you have been counting your own milestones and finding that someone keeps appearing in them in the same role. Making the moment smaller than it should have been redirecting the space toward themselves. You are allowed to name it. You are allowed to make the list. Drop your city in the comments. Tell me if you had a Brittany in your life. I read every single one. Hit the bell. Share this. More stories coming. I'll see you next time.